I want to start the shiur with asking somebody if someone can explain me the title. Where are we?
What is the title?
Here's that. The title was Ruach and Basar in Sefer Bamidbar. I'll write it on the. I'll write it in the chat.
Well, Basar is the birds that flew in and they ate the Basar. So the Ruach is both the wind of them flying in and the smell of the meat.
Okay, so you gave me a translation. 1 second. There. I'm assuming the title is a little unclear because when I said it to Emmanuel, he also wasn't sure what I was talking about. Second, let me admit the waiting room. There's a couple more people coming in. Give it. We'll start up again. So someone explain me again. Who was talking before?
It was me, Huda, and I.
Yeah, go ahead. Explain what you understood.
Since we have the story of the quail and the meat in Bamidbar, the Ruach
Okay.
is the birds flying in or possibly the smell of the meat.
Okay, so we have Ruach bringing the birds in, and I mean Ruach bringing the Slav, and the Slav came in and brought the birds. Now, so that's a technical detail, but does that come up anywhere else in Sefer Bamidbar? Let me show you what Yehuda was talking about. In Parsha Balotcha this week, in chapter 11, we have the story that people complain about the man, and they wanted some meat. And God said as follows. Here, verse 31, Pasuk Lamed Aleph. V'ruach nasa meit Hashem, that's Ruach. Vayagas slavim min hayam. Vaytosh hamachnek derechim kol v'kol. Okay, so a strong wind came, and the people got up all day long and the next day. They gathered the Slav, okay, and then the famous line, "Babasar odena ben shinehem." The meat was still in between their teeth, okay, and then God got angry at them and smote the people a terrible plague. It was called Kibrot HaTava. So Ruach, but the people asked for basar. Remember what the people said in the beginning? Itavu Ken. Vasafsu vashivri kirbo itavu ta'ava. V'yeshuva v'yavku gam b'nei Yisrael v'yamru b'yachalenu basar. The people complained for basar. Ruach came and brought them basar. Everyone with me? Wait a second. What happened to the? Get the right view here. On speak gallery view. Gallery view. Okay. Am I pinned to the screen on the? Just tell me because I'm from a different computer today.
At the moment, but I guess we could do that. 1 second. Now you're pinned.
Okay, good. Okay, and you're watching the admitting, Amira? Okay, good.
Yeah.
Already. So I was just stalling for a minute. But I'm asking, does anyone else know anywhere else in Sefer Bamidbar where we have Ruach and Basar? It sounds just like a technical detail. Okay, good. I guess it's good I picked this topic then. Anybody, the word Ruach and Basar? Okay, I guess we have room to give a shiur then. So I'm going to read you something really interesting. A story that doesn't belong in Sefer Bamidbar, but for some reason it's here. It belongs at the end of, in fact, that belongs, we find it again in the end of Sefer Shemot. I'm going to share my screen. If you have a Chumash at home, open up chapter 27 in Sefer Bamidbar. Actually, we'll start with chapter 26. In chapter 26, there's a mifkad of the new generation. Remember last week we had Parsha Bamidbar, we had the mifkad, we have the census of the first generation. In chapter 26, we have the census of the second generation. And then in chapter 27, after the census, B'not Solchad complain. God tells Moshe they're right. And then, starting in Pasuk Yud, this is what happens. V'yomer Hashem el Moshe. This is like super surprising to find this in the middle of Sefer Bamidbar. God tells Moshe, Alei el haravarim hazeh, go up. Later becomes Mount Nevo, Haravarim, passage mountain. Urei et haaretz asher natati l'nei Yisrael. Okay, take a look at the land. Boritota, take a look at the land from Haravarim. V'nesapta el amecha, which means to die. Gather to your nation. It's a nice way in Chumash of saying people dying. We have it by our forefathers many times. Okay. Gambata kasher nesaf Aaron achicha. Just like Aaron died in a nice, quiet way. Kasher mrita mitpiba midbar tzin b'rivat ha'ida. Because you made me bitter. In the story of Meriva, Lakdisheni v'mayim leinehem. You didn't sanctify me with the water in front of them. Hey merivat kadesh midbar tzin. Okay. God tells Moshe basically it's time to die. What should Moshe do? He should die. Go up the mountain and say goodbye. This is what Moshe says. Vaydaber, okay? Vaydaber Moshe Hashem lemor. The only time in Chumash, if I'm not mistaken, where we have this, Moshe is speaking harshly to God. Usually it's Vaydaber Hashem Moshe lemor. When Moshe talks to God, it's Vayomer Moshe. Or Vaycham Moshe, but by Dibur Moshe, Vaydaber Moshe b'nei Hashem lemor, is here in Parsha Vayera something similar. But a very harsh statement. By Devar Moshe Hashem lemor, Yivkor Hashem Elohei haruchot l'chol basar ish ha'leida. He asked God to appoint basically a successor. Asher yitzei lifnehem, asher yavod lifnehem, asher yotzim, asher yivim. Moshe is demanding from God to appoint a successor for Moshe. V'lo ti'adat Hashem k'tzon she'en lemoreh. And the people of Israel should not be like sheep without a shepherd. Okay. And God tells Moshe Rabbeinu, okay, take Yeshua ben Nun, Ish asher ruach bo, a man who has ruach, I'm not translating ruach on purpose, and give him smicha, and charge him in front of Elazar Kohen, in front of the people, and take from your glory upon him. So people listen to him, and he'll stand in front of Elazar, and that's what Moshe does. And he gives smicha to Yeshua. Now, let's go back to Pasuk Tetzayin. How does he describe God? Yivkor Hashem, Elohei haruchot l'chol basar. Isn't that a strange description of God? That's how they see the translate in English. The God of the spirits of all flesh. That's what that means. The spirits of all flesh. Said a man over the congregation. Hope my question is clear. For some reason, later in Sefer Bamidbar, at a very key moment, when it's time for Moshe to die, and Moshe demands that God give them a leader, a replacement leader. Moshe doesn't argue, I don't want to die. It's not like Parshat Hanan, where Moshe says, oh, I don't want to die, let me come and see. He accepts the fact he's dying. And Moshe demands from God that he appoint a successor. But why in this context, and many times in Chumash, Moshe talked to God, he never described God as Elohei haruchot l'chol basar. So did anyone ever, any thoughts on that? Anybody? I just hope the question is clear. You guys awake today? No one's usually, I guess, or I'm used to changing.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. I want to understand, why is it that Moshe Rabbeinu refers to God in his request to appoint a successor? He refers to God as Elohei haruchot l'chol basar. I'm trying to explain my title, which is my big question. Why is Moshe Rabbeinu, at the end of his career, when God tells him to die, I understand why Moshe wants God to appoint a successor, but why in this context is Moshe referring to God as Elohei haruchot l'chol basar?
You need an appropriate leader.
Reason. What?
An appropriate leader.
He wants an appropriate leader, fine. But why is Moshe Rabbeinu referring to God and appealing to God with that phrase, Elohei haruchot l'chol basar?
It means you created this mess, so you fix it.
Okay, so let him say that. He doesn't complain.
He's not complaining.
Like if Moshe was the El Rachum V'Chanun, I understand. But why is he saying what's Elohei haruchot l'chol basar have to do with appointing a leader?
It means
something to do with the birds
you can
before.
find somebody. Only you can find somebody.
Okay. I understand why he's trying. I'm trying to understand. The question is better than any, I'm going to suggest an answer.
He referring back to the man.
So that's exactly my point. That's why it's a Parsha Balotah this week. There must be something in the story of the manna where Ruach brings basar that has to do with leadership.
Yeah.
Is that clear?
Well, he does say, God says to him, when he says, I have no limitation, that I can feed the meat, as much meat as we need to. When Moses questions him, are you able to provide meat? He says, can you question me? So if he can provide the meat, he can provide a leader.
You need a leader who can feed the people.
And the people are a bunch of complainers. You have to know how to deal with all the kvetchers.
Okay, so you guys, you're catching on now. What I'm getting at is that in the context of appointing a leader who can deal with the people, Moshe Rabbeinu is referring to God as Alei Ruchot L'Chol Basar. The only other story I have earlier in Sefer Bamidbar, or anywhere earlier in Chumash, where I have Ruach and Basar together, Ruach bringing Basar, is the story of the Slav. And in the story of the Slav of Parsha Balotah, it's also a story of leadership. Remember? So I'm trying to explain why I want to read the story in Perek Yud Aleph carefully, and not as a standalone, isolated story, but rather as the theme of Sefer Bamidbar. Let me make that clear. The first 10 minutes, everyone's signing on.
Moshe
Yeah, Larry?
complained, why am I the leader?
He's complaining?
In Balotcha.
Yeah. So we're going to study now Balotcha. What I'm trying to explain is because in Parsha Balotcha, we have a strange story where the people ask for food, and God and Chumash goes out of its way to talk about Ruach bringing Basar. And then later on, when it's time for Moshe to die, Moshe turns to God with this appellation, Eloi Ruchot L'Chol Basar, and requests for a replacement, of leadership, that Am Yisrael should not be without a leader. There's got to be something more basic to this story than just a standalone story. It has to do with the theme of Sefer Bamidbar, which I want to claim has a lot to do with leadership. Now, there's one other time where God is referred to with that appellation. Anyone know where? Without doing a word search? Where else is God? Where else is Moshe referred to God as Eloi Ruchot L'Chol Basar? Okay, I got you guys early in the morning today. So this will surprise you, I'm sure. I'll share my screen again. Let's open up again Sefer Bamidbar in the story of Korach, chapter 16. In chapter 16, what happens? Moshe tells Korach, and everyone complains. And then Moshe says, take 250 men, and Korach and Aaron stand for the Torah test. Everyone took their makel. So Korach gathers his followers in front of the Mishkan. Everyone's holding their machtot with the Torah on top, waiting for the results for the 250. And in the middle of all this, what happens? God tells Moshe and Aaron, God told him, get out of that group, get away from there. Let me swallow them up and kill them. Moshe and Aaron fall on their faces and they say, El Elohei Aruchot L'Chol Basar, Ha'ish Echad Yechtav Ha'Kodah Tiksov. Are you going to punish the entire congregation for the sin of one person? Now you all remember that story? So two times in Sefer Bamidbar, Moshe and Aaron referred to God as Elohei Aruchot L'Chol Basar. And in one earlier story in chapter 11, we find Ruach bringing Basar and a story about leadership. Okay? Now, is Parsha Korach about leadership? Big time, isn't it? Parsha Korach is the challenge of Moshe and Aaron's leadership. That's the whole background to it. So what I want to do today, in light of that, I want to read the story of the Slav and try to catch on and see why it's central to the Sefer Bamidbar. Now, Let me share my screen one more time and open up a real chumash, one like this. Here, I'm going to open up this kind. Move this to the side, and we're going to want Sefer Bamidbar. If you have a regular Koran Tanakh style at home, much better. Take a look at this. Okay. Parsha Vayikra begins with the commandment to light the menorah, etc., and switching the Bechorim. In Perek Tet, Ria Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni, right? And then we have how they traveled following the Anan, all the background. I'm in chapter 10 now. In chapter 10, in Perek Yud and Parsha Vayikra, we have the commandment to make the Chasatzrot, the 2 trumpets, and then finally, Vayi B'Shana Shenit, in the second year, B'Chodesh Hasheni B'Sim L'Chodesh, on the 20th day of the second month, Na'aleh Hanan Me'al Mishkan Ha'idut, Vayistu B'nei Yisrael L'Masim Midbar Sin, Vayishtu Adam Paran, and we begin our travel, all the Shvatim together is planned, and everything's going great. Okay? Elu Maseh B'nei Yisrael L'Sivotam Vayisrael. That's how they travel. Moshe asks for a tour guide. Chovav invites him to come along. It seems like he agrees. And then, Vaisumi Har Hashem, they travel from Har Sinai, from God's mountain, 3-day distance. From the beginning of Sefer Bamidbar till here, everything is perfect. Everything's fine. Nothing's going wrong. We're organizing the people. We brought Korban Pesach. Not one negative story about Am Yisrael at all. And then the famous upside down nuns, followed by Ibn Sauron, Moshe. When the Aaron would travel, Moshe would say, Hashem, referring to bring Hashem represented by the Aaron, let God get up and cause our enemies to scatter and let our enemies run away from us. And when the Aaron would settle down under travel, he said, God should rest for the thousands of the troops of Israel. Basically, we're marching from Har Sinai on the way to conquer the land of Israel, and everything should be fine. So again, the first 10 chapters, everything's great. Chapter 11, things start going wrong. And from chapter 11 through chapter 25, so 14, 15 chapters, in almost every single story, people are sinning and people are dying. And basically, it's a story, instead of the story of how Am Yisrael goes and conquers the land of Israel, it's why we don't make it and who doesn't make it and why they don't make it. People don't make it from the first generation because of their sins. Yes, Safsuf, the Mitavim and the Mitonanim. Then we have Chet HaMraglim, and the whole generation is off. Then we have the story of Korach, people die there. The Magifah, and people get swallowed. Then we have the story of Benot Midian later on, Nachash Nechoshet. From chapter 26 and on, everything's fine. The last time anyone dies is with the story of Korach. So that's going to have this. Now, take a careful look at the story of the Mitonanim of chapter 11, because it's not just an isolated story. It's the beginning of everything falling apart. Everything falls apart in chapter 11. Now, when something goes wrong, we have a custom blame somebody else. Starts in Gan Eden, doesn't it? Man makes a mistake, blames it on his wife, blames it on God. And we'll see what's happening here now. So I'm going to switch now to let me see if we're on board. Okay, so in light of this, we're going to read chapter 11 and try to understand what's going on and why Moshe is going to use this phrase in the context of leadership every time. Let's open up a chumash again, and this time we want Vayikra, not this one. Where's the English? Here we go. No, we say for Bamidbar. Let's move this to the side. I'll make it a little bit bigger, and we're going to read the story. Chapter 11. Chapter 11. Okay. The people, mitonanim, that's complainers, murmuring, as they say here in English. God's not happy with their behavior. Okay. God hears their complaints. God's angry, like Harapol, and he sends fire, and people start either dying or bad things happen at the edge of the camp. By Tzaka Moshe, there's trouble in the camp. There's death probably. There's punishment. The people complain to the leader. Vayitpalel Moshe el Hashem, latishkaesh, Moshe davens, and the fire stops. Now, that's a good act of leadership, isn't it? The people complain, and Moshe helps them. In fact, he davens. It's an isolated incident, and it's bad that they're sinning, but Moshe davens for them, and he saves them. Does Moshe know what they're complaining about? It seems like God hears their complaints and brings a punishment. Moshe doesn't seem to be unaware, but Moshe davens to God, and God listens to his prayer. Like Tavera, that place was called Tavera, Kibar Bam Esh Hashem, from Beira, like burning, because that's where God's anger and fire burnt them. Remember, at Har Sinai, God's fire represented God, and now the fire is punishing them. Now starts scene 2. And this time Moshe doesn't daven. I mean, doesn't daven like he did before. Pay attention to the double warning. Asafsuf from Lashon le'asof is to gather. But for some reason, I don't know why, who knows why the English calls them a mixed multitude. That's not what asafsuf means. How would you say mixed multitude in English? I mean, in Hebrew. In Erev Rav. What this translation is doing, it's actually commentary and claiming that Safsuf is the Erev Rav, which a lot of Parshanim claim that. We didn't sin; it was the non-Jews who were tagging along with us. What a lot of people don't realize, the only time the Erev Rav is mentioned explicitly is on the day we left Egypt. They're never mentioned as Erev Rav any other time again in Chumash. In Midrashim, they blame him for everything that goes wrong. But in Chumash, most likely, if the Erev Rav are Egyptians and people following us, most likely, as soon as Pharaoh came and chased us, right before Kriyat Yam Suf, the assumption is they went back home. They were just following us when things were going good. We were going to serve our God in the desert. They came to watch and maybe joining the celebration, but mostly they left. This Safsuf is a gathering of people, but pay attention to the word asaf. Asaf means together. Hitabu tava. They had a taiva for a taiva. Remember we had the word taiva in Gan Eden with Eve? Then Vayeshuva vayivku gam b'nei Yisrael. Now this gam b'nei Yisrael, that's why people think that Asafsuf are not from Am Yisrael. That's why they identify with the Erev Rav. But Gam can mean even. It doesn't mean Gam can mean a lot of different things, but it's coming to intensify the problem. But additional people in Israel come and complain. Basically, there's a small group of troublemakers, and they start, complaining, and then all of a sudden, everyone starts complaining. Who's going to give us meat? We remember the good fish we had. By the way, basar here doesn't mean fleishik meat, because the Slav is going to be birds, and fish they ate in Egypt was a thing. But any type of what's really interesting, the word basar, the whole reason why we have to wait 6 hours to be bilchus and fleishiks is from a pasuk later on. Habasar den ben shnehem. If you know Yeridea. And the laws of that even when something's in your mouth, it's still considered meat. It's called basar ben hashinaim. They learn from here, and we apply it to primarily the fleishiks. But either way, they say we remember the fish that we ate in Egypt, free, and all the fruit and vegetables, and the watermelons and stuff, the onions and the garlic. Okay. Now we're just all dry, just this lousy manna. Now, in parentheses, Chumash tells us about the man. The man was just like some type of seed. It's describing how good the man was. Listen carefully. Shatu'am, the people went out and sort of like wandered around. V'laktu, pay attention to the verb. V'laktu v'tachnu b'rechaim. Laktu, as they gathered it. V'tachnu b'rechaim, they grinded it. Okay, and then they cooked it, and they made cake with it. And it tasted like something honey-like. Basically, it's and when the towel came down on the king, when the dew came down, the towel came with it. Basically, these psukim, pasuk zayin, chet, and tet, Chumash is describing to the reader how the man was totally fine. Remember the source you could make it, it's almost like soya nowadays or tofu, where you can make it taste like anything you wanted. But the people wanted real meat. Now, is it a legitimate complaint? That we have to see, but there's no doubt Moshe's not happy. Listen to what Moshe says. Moshe says as follows. Moshe is the people complaining. Right? Right? God is not happy with the people, like before, and Moshe is not happy. And listen to Moshe's complaint. Moshe is complaining to God, how come you're so mean to me and evil to me? And why do you not like me? Do you put me in charge of this nation? Whereas Moshe is complaining about his job. Who remembers a similar phrase to Lama Hariota Lavadecha? Anyone remember where something very similar?
Lama Hariota La'am Hazeh. Why did you send me to Paro to make life worse?
Yeah. And what book is that in?
At the end of Parshat Shemot.
Yeah, exactly. And in what context?
Moshe's first appearance before Paro when he makes life worse.
Yeah. No, it's after Moshe goes for the first time to Pharaoh, demanding to let them go serve the God in the desert, as God told him to do. Remember? And then what happened to my Chumash? Here we go. We have very similar wording, but Moshe is not complaining about the people. He's complaining about God because God's been mean to the people. You promised redemption. At the end of chapter 5, Moshe goes to Pharaoh and says, send my people out. And God promised them he's bringing redemption. God didn't tell Moshe Rabbeinu it's going to get worse before it gets better. The people complained, they doubled the workload. The people, the Shatri Yisrael, complained to Moshe. Okay. By good Moshe Valron, he said, then they told him, God should judge you. You made us look bad. You know, it's because of your crazy ideas of redemption. Now we have even a harder workload. Moshe does have an answer for the people. Instead, Moshe goes to God, Vayomar, Adonai, Lama Hareota Lamazeh, Lamazeh Shlachtani. Okay? Why are you making things worse for the people? Why'd you send me? And from the time you sent me to Pharaoh to speak on your behalf, things only got worse for this nation, and you didn't save them. And God tells him, don't worry, be wait and be patient. That's the beginning of chapter 6, which is the end of Parshat Shemot. God tells Moshe Rabbeinu, you'll see what it'll be. By the time I'm done, he'll send you out. But what's important, you can see the contrast between Moshe Rabbeinu's leadership in Sefer Shemot, where he's sticking up for the people and complains to God when things are bad for the people. And now he's complaining to God about his job as a leader. Where are we? Back to Sefer Bamidbar. Here we are. Now let's see Moshe Rabbeinu continues this complaint. Did I conceive this nation? Or did I give birth to the nation? That was when someone gives birth when the mother gives birth to a child, she's responsible for raising the child. Moshe says, did I give birth to this nation? You're telling me to carry the burden of this nation like a wet nurse takes care of a baby? Till I bring him to land? Where am I going to get meat for this nation? And they're crying to me, give me meat, okay? Then Moshe says, I can't do this anymore. I can't do it by myself. It's too heavy for me. If that's what you want from me, you know what God, Moshe tells God? Hargeni Naharov, just kill me already. If I found favor in your eyes. See the word Matzatechem Benai? Val Rebarati. Okay? And don't make my life so terrible. In a nutshell, what's Moshe doing? He's giving up. He's had it with leadership. He says he can't do this by himself anymore. Something breaks down now in Moshe's leadership, correct? Now, what's God's answer? Vayom Hashem Moshe, esvedli, see the word lesof? It's going to be milah matcha. It's a leitmotif. It's a key word that's going to tie all the themes together. Remember, we had Asafsuf in the beginning. The story started with the Asafsuf, and now we have God telling Moshe Rabbeinu, gather me together 70 elders. Listen carefully. Asher yadata kihem zignei ha'am b'shotrav. You know that these are the elders of the people and their officers. But l'kachtotem el moed, bring him to El Moed and stand with you. And God says, I'm going to come down and I'm going to speak to you in the El Moed with these 70 leaders. V'yatzate min haruach asher alecha. I'll take the ruach that's with you. V'samti alehem. I'll take the ruach with you and give it on them. And they'll carry the burden of this nation, and you want to do it by yourself. So solving the leadership problem. God says, Moshe, right, too much for you. I'm going to give you 70 helpers. And tell the people, get ready for tomorrow, and you can eat meat. You know, you cried saying, who can eat meat? You know, as you complained, it was better back in Egypt. And it says, not one day you're going to eat meat, not 2 days. I gave you meat for a whole month, right? Until it comes out of your nostrils. Says you want food, you can have all you want, right? And it's going to bring you down. And then God is really angry that the people have basically abandoned God. You've rejected God. Asher ma'astem. You said when someone's unchosen, it's called Be'isa. And then Moshe says, where am I going to get meat from? And then God says, don't worry, God can do everything. And he'll bring meat, and then Moshe is going to fulfill what God says. Now, I want to take a look here at God telling Moshe Rabbeinu as follows. Okay, I'm going to explain this without the look at the pasuk, then I'll share then I'll take the screenshot off. God tells Moshe, as gather me 70 elders. Asher yadata kihem zignei ha'am b'shotrav. You know that they're the leaders. My point is as follows. God doesn't tell Moshe Rabbeinu, pick 70 helpers. It's not your job to choose the helpers. Don't pick 70 people that you want. Take 70 people that are already national leaders. That's people that you know already are working with the people, and share your leadership with them. God doesn't tell Moshe Rabbeinu, you pick 70 helpers. Take existing natural leadership, go from the bottom up, and share your leadership with them. Almost to the point where God's saying, Moshe Rabbeinu, almost something similar to what Yitro told him early, you can't do it by yourself. You have to share your leadership and responsibility, but pick people who are already natural leaders. Now, let's go back and try to understand why is Moshe so angry? So I'll share with you a story from back in yeshiva. I forgot who I heard it from, I think from Rabbi Midal, way back. He says, when students are complaining in yeshiva about the food, it's a sign that the classes aren't good. Can anyone explain what that means? If yeshiva bachrim in yeshiva are complaining about the food in yeshiva, it's a sign that the shiurim are not good.
It's an old psychological thing. If you're not happy, you look something to complain about. But if you're happy, you don't even notice the food.
That's right. No, if people are really into learning, if guys are start steiging away and learning is important, so it's lousy food, they'll survive. Listen, if there's no food at all, they'll complain. But if it's only lousy yeshiva food, it's not the best food. So big deal. But when someone's really into something and really involved in something, they need enough food to stay alive, but they have to go out to eat, they don't need special food. Whatever's there, it's fine for them. They're not going to complain. If people complain about the food, they're not happy, and also they're not being productive. And it's an indicator that something else is a problem. And that's the word tavu tava. But beforehand, they complained for food. I mean, when there's no food at all, when the month started beginning, we'll go back to it in a minute. That's a legitimate complaint. But now they're complaining to complain. They have what to eat. They just want better food. Now, it's an understandable complaint. But in the eyes of Moshe Rabbeinu, after being a whole year in Har Sinai, he says, "I've had enough." Now, what I think I see here, one second, let's check the chat. What was in the chat? 1 second. I got the wrong chat. Chat was, I'm sorry, okay. We're good. I'll clear the chat. What I want to claim is that this is an indicator that there's something wrong with the people's attitude, which we've seen since the beginning of, ever since we left Egypt, they have an attitude problem. But here, Moshe Rabbeinu, after being at heart, I'll give you a better example. If the guys in yeshiva complain after the first week in yeshiva about the food, after coming from America and having good food all the time, that's understandable. After a whole year of learning, they're still complaining about the food. That's a sign that something's wrong. It's more of an indicator. But basically, Moshe Rabbeinu simply doesn't understand the needs of the people. Their thing. And that's why he tavu tava. If the people complain about, these classes aren't good enough, or the people complaining something like a spiritual problem, fine. But this is what's called gashmis. They're complaining about food, like the quality of the food, not whether there's food there or not. So listen again what God tells Moshe Rabbeinu to do. Where are we? Let's go back to our share screen. And notice that we have Ruach and Basar in both stories. Ruach in both stories, one bringing Basar, one bringing leadership. Okay, so let's see what happens. Okay, so Vayetze Moshe goes out, Vaydaber Alam Divrei Hashem. V'yasov shivim ish b'gzei ha'am, v'yamod otam tzivot ohel. Moshe does this. God did. He gathers together 70 people who are already elders of the people. They stand by the tent of meeting. Vayir Hashem ba'adan. God comes down in the cloud. Okay, and speaks to him. Vayatzel min haruach asher alav. God takes from the noble spirit that's on Moshe, and he puts it on the 70 elders. And when the Noach and when this ruach, whatever this ruach is, rested on them, they started having nevuah, and they didn't stop, which is something positive. Right? Now we have the strangest story. Two people in the camp who weren't chosen. Good old Eldad Meidad. Notice they weren't chosen from the 70. One's name was Eldad, one was Meidad. But they also had ruach. Okay? They should have been chosen. But they didn't come to the tent. And they got nevuah in the middle of the camp. Really strange, isn't it? Okay. Now, some young lad, Chazal say it's Yeshua, starts tattling on them to Moshe Rabbeinu and tells them, Eldad and Meidad are giving nevuah in the middle of the camp. Now, I think here giving nevuah means they're giving guidance about what God wants from them. And that's the question, can these two guys without smicha go around giving guidance and things like this? And this nar, whoever the nar is, right, brings the news to Moshe Rabbeinu, right, and tells him, this isn't good, we have to stop it. Right? Vayan Yeshua b'nu Moshe Moshe b'chorov v'yomar Adonai Adoni Moshe Klaim. Yeshua suggests, put these guys in jail. It's bad. Listen, Moshe's answer, Vayomer Moshe, Hamkenei atali, are you zealous for me? Okay. Is Umi tein al kol ha'am Hashem nevim, ki tein Hashem ruach alehem. However, everyone should have this ruach Hashem and want to give guidance. Moshe says it's fine. Okay, now, and then so that's problem number one. So we get the leaders. Then Moshe gathers together the elders, and ruach comes from Hashem, another ruach, and brings the slav from the sea, the seagulls, whatever they are, some kind of birds, and they fall in the camp a distance, a one-day distance, right, like a radius or a square distance of a day's walk around the camp, and 2 amas tall. And the people get up the next day, kol yom kol layla, from day, they gather the slav, and the smallest guy took 10 piles, and people took tons and tons, and it was basically all the slav was everywhere. But basar then ben shenehem, the meat was still between their teeth, and Chazal learned from there about the need that's why we have to wait 6 hours between milchiks and pleishiks. Termi karet. God gets angry at the people for hoarding. Okay. The people who said who took too much slav were called the mitavim, remember tatu vava, and for kibbutz they continued to travel to Chatzirot. Okay. This story is one of the most complex stories in Sefer Bamidbar. And there's an amazing chazal that say, they try to identify what was it that Eldad and Meidad were saying. Anyone remember what Chazal say? But Eldad, I think Rashi brings it down. What were Eldad and Medad saying? They got Yeshua so angry. Anyone remember? So Chazal bring down that Eldad and Medad were saying in the camp, guess what? Moshe and Aaron are going to die, and Yeshua is going to bring him to Israel. And that's why Yeshua, tells Moshe Rabbeinu to put him in jail. They're undermining the leadership. I don't want to bring examples from this week's politics, but when everyone's talking that Moshe and Aaron days are numbered, right? It's a sign that people are not happy with their leadership. But I'm getting at there's a core leadership problem in this story, and in this story, what happens? God brings ruach and brings basar to solve the people's complaint, but He's not happy about their complaint. Now, I want to go to the. I want to give one little insight on this whole situation. It seems like Moshe is not happy with the people complaining about food, but God gives them the food they ask for, but still He's not happy with the fact how they gather it. Now, we just had. I want to go back to Sefer. I want to go back to Sefer Shmot for a minute. I want to go back to the first story of the manna, the first time we had it in Sefer Shmot. Let's go back to Shmot chapter 16. Here we have a legitimate complaint. Remember, when they go from Elim, they get to meet Barsin. The month after we leave Egypt, there's no food. Okay. What's the V'yomar Lehem Bnei Yisrael? Mi'tein mutenu b'yad Hashem. Okay, I'm sorry. The people complain by Ilonu al Kodat Beisrael Moshe Aaron b'Midbar. They complain to Moshe Aaron. They say, "Mi'tein mutenu b'yad Hashem be'eretz Mitzrayim." We should have died in Egypt on a full stomach. V'shivtenu otzir habasar. Remember that word again? V'ochlenu lechem l'sova. Ki otzeitem otanu el hamidbar ze lamit et kol hakal ze barav. Listen to their attitude. After witnessing the 10 plagues in Yitzhak Mitzrayim and Kriyat Yamsuf and everything, the people think they're on a death march. Right? Their attitude problem is amazing. After everything that I did for them, they're in a difficult situation. And what's their conclusion? God wants them all to die. Okay. So what's God's solution? God tells Moshe, remember the good old man. Follow the word leket. Leket is going to be the opposite of lesof. Leket is to glean, like a little bit. Lesof is to take a lot. Basically, leket will be taking food as much as you need, and lesof means to hoard or to accumulate. Okay, and this is going to test them: are they ready to follow my Torah? And then come on Yom HaShishi, and they'll get what they need ready, and then they get lechem mishnah. But listen, I show you to Yom Yom, they get a double amount of what they were leket. And then Moshe tells them gives them the answer. God said Moshe says people God heard their cry. And then they looked to the desert and people were convinced that it's God who brought them there. Okay? God tells Moshe, I heard the cry, gives them without going into the details of the story, I want to pay attention to the word leket here. The people say it's man, and here. Zed davar shirtziva Hashem liktu mimeno ish lo piachlo omer lagogolet. Got it? And by astuchem ben Yisrael vayilketu amarbe b'amamit. Okay, they measure with the omer, etc. No leftovers, and finally, vayikutu oto baboker again leket ish lo piachlo, and it would melt. The people come and complain, and God said, this is what God commanded. And basically, that's here. But the verb here, that's what we wanted. Pasuk Vav. Sheshet yamim tilketuhu, uv'yom hashvi Shabbat lo yebo. But the verb that's emphasized over and over again is the laket. Then God gets angry because they went out on Shabbat, and And little by little, they're learning their lesson. And here we have the same description of the man. Like we had before, and we leave it for safekeeping. In contrast to the word leket, which means to take a little bit, as much as you need, what word do we find in the story of the man here? We have hasafsuf, lesof together. And ultimately what happens? Who gets punished the most? Let's take a look again. Where's the asafsuf? Wait a second, at the end of the parak. Okay. Here, Vayakam ha'am, kol ha'v bachrat, v'yasfu et haslav, hamamit asaf asra chamorim. Got it? And that's the people ate too much. So in contrast to leket, which was the man, we have lesof, to kill it into order. Or basically, what looks like, remember, we've been a year now at Har Sinai. It's the 20th year we're leaving. In the eyes of Moshe Rabbeinu, it's an educational failure. It seems like in the eyes of God, it's an educational failure as well. There's something in the people's behavior that indicates, at least to Moshe Rabbeinu, that the people aren't ready yet to be God's people. Now, I want to take this and use this to explain what goes wrong in Sefer Bamidbar. Bottom line, Sefer Bamidbar is a tragedy. It doesn't work. And when something goes wrong, there's always someone to blame. I can blame the people, and for sure there's reason to blame the people, as we'll see. I can blame the leadership. I can blame the elders of the people, or I can blame Moshe Rabbeinu, or it's the people that I can blame God. The people are blaming God. Moshe is blaming the people. God's trying to give them leadership, but something's not working. And the way the people complain all through Chumash, ever since they left Egypt, they always think that they're on this death march. Even, take a look, even in Sefer Bamidbar, even in at the end of Parshat Korach, even in way past that, even in Parshat Chukat, in chapter 20, past the Korach story and everything, when they run out of water in Midbar Sin, there's no water for them to drink. The people complain to Moshe. They say we should have died before God, like they'd rather die here. But why'd you bring us out here to die? And remember, what did Moshe and Aaron do? They fall on their face, and then God has to tell them to take out their staff, and the famous Riva story of Moshe and Aaron lose their leadership. But what I'm getting at is that all through Sefer Bamidbar, the people have an attitude problem, but you can see from the attitude and the complaining about food that they're not interested in being God's people. They don't mind being redeemed. They don't mind getting a good land. They don't mind having a good life. But wanting to dedicate their lives to God, that's not on the radar. Now, Moshe Rabbeinu is right about his complaint. And he has every right to be angry. God's trying to give him a solution, and it seems like that solution doesn't work as well. I want to use the so whenever there's a question of leadership for the people. So the next story where there's a leadership issue where Moshe turns to God. Well, with the Meraglim, Moshe falls on his face. Moshe falls on the face. They don't even turn to God. Only when it's over, they pray to God not to kill him in the desert, let him die slowly. In the Korach story, they complain to God, and we say the story we saw at the end when it's about to die, he complains. But when Moshe refers to God as it's referring to the first leadership issue in the beginning of the travel. Now, I want to suggest something. I'll first go with Chetam Raglim, and then I'll talk about Korach and Moshe dying. I'm pretty sure we did a share on the Meraglim. Let me turn this off for a second. Let me stop the share for a second. Stop share. What I suggested by Chetam Raglim is that God sending the Meraglim. He wants them to tell the truth. And the truth is the land's impossible to conquer, but it's a good land. It's a good land. it's impossible to conquer without a miracle, but God can help you on the condition you keep the mitzvot. And my point was that it wasn't the sin of the spies wasn't that they said the lamb was bad. They said the lamb was good. It wasn't they didn't believe that God exists. They know that God exists. But they also know, and they told the truth, it's impossible to conquer without God's help. God was hoping the leadership would encourage the people to take the challenge and keep God's mitzvot and make themselves worthy of God's help. And that didn't happen. Instead, they said, let's bring the people back to Egypt. They don't want to be God's people. My point is that the main problem of leadership, they were unable to take a nation of slaves and turn them into a nation that wants to serve God. They're a nation that wants a good life. Doesn't mind having land if it's given to them on a silver platter, but they're not looking for the good life. I mean, they're not looking for a life of dedicating their life, their behavior to representing God. And that's what got Moshe Rabbeinu so angry. That's what gets him angry throughout the whole book. Now, there's this mutual problem between Moshe and the people all the way through. And the Chetam Raglim, again, he falls on his face because, again, after a whole year, that's their attitude. Yeshua and Kalev, they take leadership in that story. In the story of Korach, again, Korach complains about Moshe Rabbeinu's decision, which he claims is nepotism, that only Aaron and his sons can bring korbanot. And Datan Aviram and their group, together with Korach, complain about Moshe's political leadership. But again, there's so many people complaining about Moshe and Aaron, something's not working between Moshe and the people. And in that story, God says, Moshe turns to God and says, now, I want to go look quickly at that story and see what happened. Back in chapter 16. There's something very ambiguous in what happens with the 250. Moshe tells Korach, you and your whole Idah, your whole gathering, okay, come in front of God together with Aaron and you tomorrow, and like the 250 men, take their fire pans, etc., and stand for the test. Okay. Now, Korach gathers the entire Idah. Now, who's the entire Idah? Let's go back to the beginning. Who does Korach take? Korach takes and Datan Aviram, and they come in front of God with 250 men. Now, is it the Korach, Datan Aviram are big shots and they have 250 followers? Or Korach, Datan Aviram, super big shots, they come together with 250 regular big shots, and they have who knows how many followers, thousands, tens of thousands of followers. Now, is this a nuisance problem or is this a mutiny in the camp? If you read carefully, the pshat is, it's 250 leaders, and there's tens of thousands of Jews following them, which is probably the Eidah that we're talking about. I want to prove to you from here. So the 250 leaders who want to bring korbanot, they come in front of God, they come for the test. And hoping to win, what does Korach do? Korach brings the whole nation together in front of the tent of meeting, and Kvod Hashem comes on the Eidah. Now, we're waiting for the answer of what's going to happen to the 250. And watch what happens. God says, let me kill them all. Who does God want to kill? The 250 or all the people gathering, the thousands gathering outside and Korach's supporters? Understand my question? And this is what Moshe Daven's for. Is the Ish Echad Korach and they down to 250? If that's the case, God doesn't answer the prayer. Or is the Ish Echad a single person? And Kol Eidah means thousands of people, and then God does answer the prayer. When you see God's answer, it seems like the Eidah are the followers, not this 250, or the thousands, tens of thousands of followers that the 250 have. Because what does God tell Moshe to do? Tell the Eidah, to disassociate themselves from the people. Now, usually whenever Moshe and Aaron daven, God answers the prayer. So if Moshe and Aaron fall on the face and pray to God, right, why punish the whole nation because of one person? If it's referring to the 250 or the Edah, then God doesn't answer because the 250 get killed. If these Shechad are the troublemakers, the leaders, that's Korach, Datam, and the 250, and Datam Haviram, and the Kol Edah are the tens of thousands of the followers, then God does listen and gives them a solution. If you want them not to be punished, have them disassociate themselves and leave that group. Now, but again, how does God turn to Moshe Rabbeinu? How does Moshe turn to God? Okay. He's referring back to the story in chapter 11, where God suggested that Moshe share his ruach with other people. Now, what I want to end with is a story in Parshat Pinchas. And I want to use this to suggest what's going on in the book as a whole. It's going to be in chapter 27. God told Moshe Rabbeinu to go up to Mount Har Varim and die. Correct? Here. God tells Moshe Rabbeinu again, chapter 27, go up to Har Varim, see the land, and say goodbye. God doesn't tell him who his successor is going to be. Moshe Rabbeinu assumes, it seems like, that God's not appointing a successor. And therefore, Moshe turns to God and says, Yifkod Hashem el he turns to God again, the first leadership story. Appoint someone, because if you don't, they'll be like sheep without a shepherd. And God gives them, okay, take Yoshua. Now, someone tell me, could something else happen? What would have happened if God would not have appointed a leader? What else could have happened? Who else might have appointed the leader if God didn't appoint the leader? I'll give you an example. In first grade, the teacher appoints a class president. In 11th grade, 12th grade, the students pick their class president. In general, leadership should be from the bottom up. People should pick their leaders. When you have to appoint a leader on top of people, that's a sign that they're not mature enough to pick their own leader. Again, I can bring tons of examples from politics. But whenever there's a city council or a moitza that has corruption, what does the government do? They have a vada. They have to appoint someone to run the council. But ideally, in elections, people should vote and choose their own local leaders. What Moshe is telling God, basically, I think, is that you can't trust them to pick their own leader. They're not ready yet. What I want to claim is there's a lack of trust that Moshe has in the people. And he's 100% right. Moshe tells God, if you don't appoint a leader and don't let me take care of it before I go, it's going to be crazy. They're not mature enough to pick their own leader yet. And basically Moshe is telling God, you can't trust them to pick their own leader. And as outgoing leader for the last 40 years, Moshe is telling God, don't trust them. They're not ready yet. You need to appoint a leader for them. And my claim is Moshe is 100% right. But my claim is that's exactly the problem, because all through Chumash, especially in Bamidbar and earlier in Shemot, the people don't trust Moshe, and Moshe doesn't trust the people. There's a lack of trust that's mutual. Because whenever there's a problem, remember back in the story of the manna, people said, why did you guys bring us out here to die? And we saw this story also in Parshat Chukah. But what's happening over and over again is that Moshe is doing all these miracles. And listen, when Korach, Datam, Torach, and the 250 complain about the fact that only Aaron can bring korbanot. Remember, Rav Lechem, Lama, Yasu, and Moshe, it's not my idea, it's God's idea. They believe in God. They don't trust Moshe Rabbeinu's decisions. They think Moshe, they're accusing him of nepotism. And they're accusing him, you bring us to the wrong spot, you're bringing us here to die. The people don't trust Moshe and Aaron. Even this week's parsha, even Aaron and Miriam don't trust Moshe when they complain about all these complaints again. There's a lack of trust between Moshe and the people. And on the flip side, Moshe doesn't trust them. Yeah. God has to tell Moshe Rabbeinu, appoint 70 elders and don't pick people. You want to pick people that they want. But we had earlier, back in Parsha Yitro, when Moshe does everything himself, It means you don't trust other people to do the job. Everyone knows what happens. When you don't trust, you can't delegate. When there's a reason why certain people, I'll do it myself. I'd rather do it myself. When you don't trust the people working with you, I'll do it myself. I don't trust you. But there's a terrible lack of trust between the people and Moshe, and there's lack of trust of Moshe and the people. And my claim is that's at the core of the problem of that's the core of the tragedy in Sefer Bamidbar. Moshe doesn't trust the people, and he's 100% right. And the people don't trust Moshe because of their level. But whenever leaders don't trust the people don't trust their leaders. Yeah, Phil?
It runs through it because I keep thinking that Hashem could have made the people happy if he wanted to. This is a story of free will. But things go wrong because the people were given their freedom and they couldn't rise for the occasion. Now, we believe that Hashem Baruch could have fixed everything, but that was not the case. This was an experience in humanity of the ability to free will. Because, for example, those who said at the beginning, we're going to die in the desert, they were right. They were right. They all died in the desert.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It's the self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, so it seems to me that this is a tremendous story of the exercise of free will and where free will failed. Would you agree?
I agree, but exactly, but it failed, but that doesn't mean that it was wrong.
Oh, yeah, I think it was
You
wrong.
can't become God's people if leadership is only from the top. When we come out of Egypt, God's doing everything.
Yes.
You know what? There's in Shiur Tazinu, you have a beautiful example. This is what I heard from Rabbi Ben-Nun. In Shiur Tazinu, chapter 33, I think, right? No, 32. Okay. The Bereshit says, what do you call it? No, don't blame God when things go wrong. It says, right? Learn about your history from your elders.
Yeah.
Okay. When God, named Elyon, gave out the land to the nations, right? He picked the people of Israel to be his Now, God found us in the desert after coming out of Egypt. He took care of us. He protected us in the desert. Fine. Listen carefully. Like an eagle stirs up the nest, and the eagle hovers over the nest.
Yeah.
Now, Yovanu explains as follows. Yifros Kanafav is not talking about the eagle, it's talking about the babies in the nest.
Yeah.
The gozalim, right? Okay. When the baby birds begin to move their wings, then the parent takes the nesher takes the babies and carries them underneath. It says when you watch eagles, when you watch nesharim raising their children, as soon as the gozal, as soon as the baby, whatever the gozal is called in English, as soon as the baby bird, the baby eagle, begins to fletch its wings, the mother picks up with its claws, picks up the baby, takes it like a meter away from the nest, and lets go, and the baby flies to the nest. Then it takes it 2 meters away, lets go, and it flies to the nest. Or basically, what the nesher does, as soon as the baby's born, it slowly teaches the babies how to fly on their own. So it's not the mother nesher taking care of the baby all the time, because they'll never learn to be independent. It's little by little, the nesher teaches its children to be independent. He says, and that's what God tried to do for us in the desert.
Yes.
We came out of the desert totally dependent on God, and we needed to be like a newborn baby. But just like a newborn baby in the beginning is totally dependent on its mother and on its parents, and little by little becomes independent till they're old enough to talk back and think they know better, etc. But that's the natural process of growth. Now, when mommy says, no, you're too young for that, you can't do that. Right? When the child doesn't grow, when children will only grow when parents trust them, that they can do things on their own, not right away, but little by little. So my claim is God wanted the nation to be God's nation. God can't do everything for us all the time. Remember after the Korach thing, God told Moshe Rabbeinu, let me give you a solution so you don't come running to me every time there's a problem. Remember what's happening in Sefer Bamidbar? Every time there's a problem, Moshe and Aaron come running to God. and fall on their face. God says, and that's why after Meim Riva, it's not a punishment, it's a consequence. God says, you can't lead the nation if every time there's a problem, you come to me and fall on your face. You have to solve the problems on your own. And remember, God says, I'll give you a solution next time there's a problem. You know, take with our own staff and use it to show them. And what's highlighted all the time in Sefer Bamidbar is Moshe and Aaron, when there's a crisis, they fall on their faces, or they complain to God, or complain about the people, instead of taking action. And God's trying to get them delegate, get people involved, and share your leadership with them. It doesn't work, because basically Moshe doesn't trust the people, and there's every reason not to trust the people. And the second that Moshe doesn't trust the people don't trust them, and there's this gap between them that's never solved. Again, I'm not saying anyone's at fault. Moshe has every reason not to trust the people, and the people have every reason not to trust Moshe. But that's exactly the tragedy of leadership in the book, and that's why, yeah, Phil.
That means this was an experiment of God's that failed.
Yeah, now it could have worked.
God gave us free will, and we didn't do it right, which is a lesson for present times, by the way. I'm just wondering if I'm really asking you if my feeling about it is sensible.
Yeah. I hear you, but I agree with you on that. I'm just saying, tell me if you understand what if I understand you correctly. My claim is that whenever we don't sit and read Chumash to sit back and judge God. I'm not saying here's a story and God did a lousy job. You know, he did.
I'm not saying you did a lousy job.
I'm thinking you're saying that either. I'm saying I read Chumash and say, what lesson can I learn from that about how to run a nation? And again, it's true that Moshe doesn't trust the people, and he has every reason not to. But that's exactly the problem. The second leaders don't trust the people won't trust them. And it's a recipe for failure. Now, how do you build trust? That's the big question. That's a hard one. Now, the fact that first generation failed doesn't mean that God failed. It meant that the people failed. That's why I got so upset with them. Just read the Cheskel. But it could have worked. But if I'm looking for long-term, what's the core to any solution? You need leadership to trust the people and people to trust the leadership. And therefore the blame is mutual. But understanding the reason for the problem is half the solution. Now, and saying you trust kids doesn't solve the problem. The second a child or a student doesn't feel trusted by their peers, there's a wall between them. It's hard to bridge. So if I'm looking again, I'm not looking for who's to blame about the failure, the tragedy of Sefer Bamidbar. Sefer Bamidbar is a tragedy. The generation that left Egypt, the guy did everything to get them ready. Mamad Har Sinai, Kriyat Yam Suf, the plagues, everything the guy did for them. Mana doesn't make it. And God doesn't let them come to Israel because they're not ready. Now, all the things that God's doing, all the Nisyonot, remember? The Man experience and Mechamet Amalek, and later everything he does with them on the way, even sending the spies, those are all, why does God send the spies? Can you do something on your own? Remember? I don't think it was wrong to send the spies. God says, Shlach lecha anashim. You send them. God wants people to be involved and take initiative on their own. You can't conquer the land and God do everything for you. And therefore, get the people involved. Okay, so they send us, they take tribal leaders, go and be involved and do things. And they give it a try, but it fails. It could have worked, but it did fail. But the idea that you need people involved, you have to delegate. That's why that Esfedli Shibimish, gathering the 70 people who are there's don't pick 70 stam people that you think are right. Take people who are naturally leaders and share your leadership with them. How are you going to solve this problem where the people don't trust you? You have to trust them. But take people that the people trust. Got it? Those 70 elders. So in the end, it goes bad, but at least it was a try. And that's why when Chazal say that the Eldad and Medad, during the as Moshe and Aaron are dying and Yeshua is going to bring them in, that's not an historical quote. That's the essence of the story, isn't it? What are Chazal saying? already in chapter 11 of Sefer Bamidbar. As soon as we leave, there's something happening that indicates that Moshe Aaron, there's something wrong with their leadership. There's some gap between Moshe and Aaron and the people. There's a leadership problem that's not solvable, and it's not going to work. It's bound to fail.
That's a tip-off.
What?
I said, that was a tip-off, that story. That
Yeah.
Everything was wrong. But Moshe realized it. He said, how about everybody else was like them, wanting to go around and improve the Jewish people. Is that what he
That's
said?
why. Who are these Navim? A Navi is someone who speaks on behalf of God. It's giving leadership. So what happens when you have like a big Rosh Yeshiva who's great, and then all of a sudden these Talmidim, they start giving, I have this derech, I have that derech, I have that derech. So is Rosh Yeshiva going to squash them and say, no, this is the derech and you can't lead on your own? Or give them independence and try to lead, but they lead in the wrong way, come up with these crazy ideas. There's no solution. There's no one correct way, other than the fact, I think, in my opinion, take home is that leaders have to trust the people and people have to trust their leaders. And how to do it isn't easy.
When I say that the experiment failed, it doesn't mean that God failed. It means
Exactly,
we
yeah.
failed. We failed, and you're projecting that in the course of Jewish history.
Mhm.
All the sins of those days have been duplicated in a modern fashion, and they smear if we don't improve.
Now, the next question is how you develop leadership that trusts people and people that trust their leaders. It begins by people wanting to take leadership and seeing the importance of leadership. But you have to teach leadership as well. You need leadership skills and training. And so now what we do instead, we sit back and complain about our leaders all day long.
That's right.
We're experts in complaining, but we don't take leadership. Because no one in the right mind will take leadership. And when the right people don't take leadership, the wrong people take leadership. So that's the question in our education system. Are we encouraging sitting and learning on all day long and don't get involved and what do you call it? And just sit back and pray that, or are we going to teach, are we going to educate children and people to take, to develop leadership skills, to take leadership and volunteer for leadership positions? Basically, you're going to tell people to go to what do you call it? To go into politics, to do the army, to become officers in the army, to become judges, to become, or are you going to sit back and just care about yourself? That's, I think it's a key educational issue, and I think it's one of the take-home messages of Sefer Bamidbar.
That means Eldad and Medad are the heroes of the story.
Mm-hmm. And Moshe agrees with it. Moshe sees there's something good about them. Yeah. He says, Halavai, that Hashem's Ruach should be with all of them. Okay, I think our time's up, so we'll stop here.
Rav, can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Mike.
Why did Hashem have to take Ruach from Moshe to give it to the Shivim Skeni? Why did he have to take it from Moshe? Why didn't he give it directly?
I understand that, like, what do you call it? Inspiration. I have no idea what this Ruach is. I don't know what it looks like. I don't know whether it's physical. All I know is the analogy Chazal have of Ner Lachaz and Ner Lamea. When you have a light, right? The light, you can take the light from one candle and light 50 other candles, and it doesn't take away from the candle that started. It's not a quantitative share, it's a qualitative share. And I think,
He could have
God's
given
not
it directly.
taking
He could
away
have
from
given it
Moshe.
directly.
That's lahatzil. I think that's the verb lahatzil, is to inspire.
Okay.
And again, it's so typical when you have a really good, strong leader who doesn't trust anyone else to do anything, and he wants to do it all himself, and doesn't think anyone can do as good a job. He's not willing to share his leadership. Where the need of good leaders is to be able to take that leadership and bring up another generation and inspire them to lead. It's just so true to life. I think it's Bamidbar is a tragedy, but it's a tragedy you can learn so much from. And what Phil was saying, that's a danger of Bechara Chavshi. The second we have our free choice to be leaders, it's necessary, but it's almost unnecessary. But without leadership coming from the bottom up, it's not going to work. It can't work long term. It can't sustain itself.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Go ahead.
There's nothing to do with political events, but it has everything to do with it.
That's right.
Okay. Anyway, I think you guys have a 15-minute break now. I'm in
Thank you.
California now. It's like 1 a.m. So I gotta go. Gotta go to sleep soon. So we'll stop here.
How are you? Wow. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.